Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Z. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, we have Josh Connolly with us. We're going to be discussing toxic parents, what that means, how to navigate these dynamics, and most importantly, how to heal moving forward. Josh Connolly is a best-selling author and one of the UK's top mental health advocates. His groundbreaking book, an Amazon bestseller, It's Them, Not You, How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story, is a transformative guide providing readers with essential tools and guided breathwork sessions to overcome toxic family dynamics and heal from past trauma. With nearly 500,000 followers on social media, Josh delivers powerful insights and strategies for navigating and healing from toxic parents. And I must tell you, one of my favorite Instagram accounts to follow. I will link his social media in the show notes. I think you'll find this episode extremely valuable and extremely relatable. And not just for toxic parents, but also in toxic dynamics in general. Enjoy. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Z. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, I have Josh Connolly, who I have been following you for a very long time on social media because you explain toxic parents so well and in such a relatable fashion. And you are such an advocate and a breath of fresh air for people who experience this unfortunate situation in their life. I find that a lot of people touch on it, but you really break it down for people and just make them feel better is the best way I can describe it. And I'm thrilled to have you on because I get a ton of questions on toxic parents, how to heal, what that looks like. So I'm gonna hand it over to you and just kind of tell everybody who you are and what you do and how you help people, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Look, the main bulk of the work that I do, and I'm very sort of lucky that I get to do lots of amazing things. But the main bulk of what I do is support people that have grown up in any kind of dysfunction. And in more recent years, this has led me to specifically support people that have grown up with what I'd call toxic parents. And we can maybe get into why I say that term, why I use that term, and what it means to me and stuff like that. But I certainly realized that I think at the core of all of our healing is to be able to find and speak our truth free from changing or dubbing it down so that people get to feel comfortable. And that shapes all of the work that I do. And I'm a breathwork coach as well. So, and within my book that I'm sure we'll talk about as well, there's QR codes at the end of every chapter that take us to the somatic work, because work of the body, understanding, I think, how much truth is held in our body and how do we speak to that truth. Breathwork is one of many, many ways, but breathwork is the one that I find most useful. And so I use that as well as other somatic practices for all of the work that I do. Yeah, that's it in short.
I love that you focus on breath work because I think regulating our nervous system in the face of not just trauma, but honestly, just everyday stress is something that is not focused on enough. And, therapy is helpful, medication helpful, all of that. But if you don't have the strategies and the skill set to regulate your own nervous system, you're constantly playing catch up. So I absolutely love that you do that. I think it's not done enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, look, I think there's more focus in more recent years. I'm noticing a lot more people are talking about the nervous system, but I
Yes.
think that one of the struggles that many of us, dare I say, most of us face is when we grew up in an environment where people made us feel a certain way, and the way they made us feel didn't match up to what they said.
Mm-hmm.
And the complexities that come with that. So understanding our nervous system and understanding where my body ends and everybody else's starts
I love that.
is so important.
Can you
And
explain that a little bit more for people, what that means?
yeah, well, look, I guess the best way that I would explain it is a lot of people talk about being an empath, right? If you dive into what we mean when we say empath, people will say it means that I take on the room's emotions and I take everybody's emotions on like a sponge, and it's really difficult for me. And I resonated when I found that term a number of years ago. But when I started to dive into that a little bit more, what I started to realize is that when I am in the company of a lot of people, when I'm able to understand what I'm feeling in my body, separate from what everybody else is feeling in their bodies, I can start to lay boundaries. And when I lay those boundaries and I become aware of not taking responsibility for other people's emotions, then I'm no longer an empath. I'm what I would say is a highly sensitive person. And so actually, that realization was huge for me. My issue is not that I feel what everybody else is feeling so deeply. My issue has always been that when I feel it, I instantly take responsibility for it. Heal that, and my life changes dramatically, you know?
I love that, because that's kind of the theoretical approach I take, is that you're not trying to get rid of any feelings. You can't really do that, but to sit and hold them differently, that gives you so much more objectivity. And then you're able to see what's in front of you and set those boundaries and be present in the moment. To try to get rid of what you're feeling, you end up just getting stuck in your head. So
exactly.
I love that, because we really can't get rid deliberately of thoughts and feelings over time as we change our behavior. But to just in the moment say, don't be anxious, we know that doesn't work. But allowing yourself to feel that and then changing your behavior, right, a different way in line with what you value and what you want, that creates so much more breathing room for you.
Yeah. And I think what we tend to do, and Western culture, if we're not careful, pushes it, is Western culture will push us up into our head to make rational sense of what we're experiencing. And a byproduct of that is that we push down what we actually feel, right?
Yes.
So then we're almost teaching ourselves that if we hold our emotions in, we're controlling them. But that's not true, right?
Correct.
When I hold my emotions in, they're controlling me, right?
Yes. Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. That's the first soundbite.
I can talk about that for hours. Okay, so let's get into toxic parents. How would you define toxic parent? What makes a parent toxic?
So look, the reason that I use toxic specifically initially to start here is I think it's a broad term that allows people to gain some insight and have a starting point to then understand what they're experiencing. Because let's face it, toxic can mean whatever you want it to mean, right? So I use it as like an umbrella term so people can go, oh, that could be me. But when the type of parent that I end up talking specifically about are the ones who will never, ever take any accountability. And so will consistently shirk any kind of accountability, no matter how much it is at the expense of anybody around them, including their children. And so essentially, what you're talking about is emotional abuse, right?
Yes.
That is what we're talking about.
Yes.
But most of the people that experience it, certainly at the beginning of their journey, would never, ever even contemplate what they're experiencing to be emotional abuse.
They don't, it's their norm. It's their baseline. They don't recognize it. And it's also a lot of times hidden. And so there's no one around you saying, you know what, Josh, that's really weird. Like that shouldn't be, you're not talking about it. You just feel this, you maybe feel a sense of shame or guilt or sadness, whatever, anger even, but you don't know that what's causing it is dysfunctional.
Exactly. Yeah. And like in what underpins all forms of abuse is emotional abuse. And for that to take place, you need a power dynamic.
Yes.
And you need trust.
Yes.
And so we live in a society, and when we're born, we're sort of, that's the way that we're wired, is to look to our parents as godlike figures. So the one place where there is no other relationship of this kind necessarily, where it's almost natural for there to be this high discrepancy in power alongside this depth of trust.
Yes.
So you have to normally work really hard to get that in a relationship. And of course, we see that happens in a romantic relationship or a partnered relationship or a friendship. But in a parent, it's kind of there and etched in your brain and your body.
Yeah.
So like if that parent happens to be abusive, it's like a breeding ground for them to be able to do it,
That's right. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's just automatically there. And so the betrayal that over time, if you come to realize it, and that traumatic moment of so I'll get to that later, but kind of that traumatic moment of that, I always say your parents will tell you that they could tell you that the sky is green and purple stripes, and you're going to believe them because they're your parents. And why on earth would your parents lie to you? Why wouldn't you be able to trust them? It's just inherent, right? That's what we do. And so you go to school and you learn the sky is blue, and you're saying, nope, sky is striped. Why would my parents lie? You all must be lying. And so then you keep that to yourself because it sounds weird, but you don't want to say anything. And what ends up happening is you create this whole narrative that's basically fed to you, but you create this whole narrative that even if you sense that something's not right, the chances of you doing something as a child to counter it or ask your parents why this or why that, you don't. You just don't. And so you're stuck with this dichotomy, and you don't quite know how to navigate it. And so you keep it to yourself. And I think that's why with neglect and emotional abuse and all that, it's so under the radar. No one talks about it while they're going through it.
Exactly. And like in like abuse in other relationships. So if I wanted to emotionally abuse you, I would have to spend time, right, and effort building your trust, right? Helping you to trust so deeply in me that you would trust that your reality is wrong and mine is right.
Correct.
Yeah. Like I would have to work for a long period of time to build that. Or some people can do it quickly, but you understand what I'm saying?
It has to be created.
It has to be created.
Yes.
But with a child, it's there by definition.
Such a good point.
And so to then try and break free from that, you have to go against everything that's ever shaped you, not just everything that's happened in this relationship over the last year and unpicking and undoing all that. You have to break everything that shapes you.
It's interesting because when I work with people who are in an abusive relationship and then they get out of it, we always talk about they have that baseline and that frame of reference of how they were before somebody broke them down. But with a child, the framework that they need to break down, there is no pre-framework. There's no perspective. There's nothing to quote, go back to or to model or shape. You are starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so scary for people who don't have a sense of self-identity, or I always say it's there, but it's very, very deep. Or somebody who has zero trust in the people around them because of what they dealt with. So to be able to rebuild that and that framework or that scaffolding on your own with no guidance, I mean, that's really scary. And so rather than do that, I think what we find in adults who have that type of upbringing is it's just too damn hard. And so it's too painful. And so I'm just going to avoid it and not do it. But by not doing it temporarily may make my life a little easier. But in the end, it's going to affect every single relationship I have, work, romantic, friendships. And I'm going to keep repeating that same pattern because while that skill set may have worked for you growing up and you needed it to survive, when you get into adulthood where that context is no longer there, but yet you're still using those same patterns that once helped you and now they don't, you start hitting a wall. And that's that, when depression, anxiety, relationship dysfunction, substance use, all of that starts to come into play because you don't know that what you're doing isn't healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have no idea.
And because it's so misunderstood in our society, most people around you are actually pushing you towards not doing anything about it, right? Because, it happens to some degree in all forms of abuse. I think particularly when the abuser is a man and towards a female, but specifically with parents, if you try to talk about what your parents are doing, people's first line of action is, we need to get you to forgive them and we need to find a way for you to love at least some of them, right? Yes. It's never like, this is abuse, we need to get you away. So society is always pushing you down that pathway that you just talked about. And then there's a whole other discussion to be had. And when you talk about things like depression and all of that that come as a result of this, I mean, how many young people have been taken to a doctor in their childhood by
Oh,
by a toxic parent, and then found themselves being like pathologized and diagnosed for what is a completely appropriate reaction to their experience, right? And then even you fast forward and take that into adulthood, if you haven't yet been able to stare in the face just how bad things were, and you go to a doctor, even if a doctor asks you what your childhood was like, most people say it was fine.
it's fine.
I lived with my mom and I still have a relationship. And so then people are like scratching their heads, thinking, feeling broken, and like there's
Yes.
something desperately wrong with them,
Yes.
and they don't have the ability to be able to see the full picture. And
Correct.
I dread to think how widespread those scenarios that we just talked about are.
I mean, the amount of children that are misdiagnosed without proper neuropsych evaluation by a
Mm,
neuropsychologist, diagnosed with ADHD and put on meds by a primary care doctor just because they can't sit still, they can't pay attention, or they zone out, or whatever the case may be, when a good chunk of the time there needs to be parenting stuff that's altered, that's shifted. But nobody, I don't want to say nobody, a lot of people don't pay attention to that. It automatically falls on the child. I see this all the time. And then in adulthood, I see this as well. I mean, you have adults who believe that their depression or their anxiety or whatever they're going through is the result of their inability to navigate their life effectively, and that they're in some way deficient in their skill set, when really it's their response, just like you said, it's totally appropriate to the context of what you grew up in. It was a necessary strategy.
yeah.
It's unfair. I always say that it's completely unfair that that's what you had to do, but you did what you needed to do to survive, and now you're being penalized for it.
Yeah, yeah. And we're trying to search for a problem in you. Because
Yes.
my dad was an alcoholic, right? So he died when I was 9 years old. At the age of about 19, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. But I look back now and I go, well, my anxiety disorder looks a lot less disordered when you look at the disordered environment
Yes.
in which it first existed in. So
Correct.
it didn't look disordered at all. It looked entirely
Mm.
appropriate in the
Correct.
environment that I grew up in.
That's exactly right. That's
But
exactly right.
the issue is I'm still carrying out that same thing as an adult, but and I
Yes.
because I'd never been able to connect the dots, which is what I eventually did
Yeah.
myself, and now I'm able to regulate much better in scenarios. I'm able to go, oh, here's what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm feeling. I know where this comes from. I know what this
Yes.
is, and now I can regulate it much
Yes.
better. It's not gone. Don't get me wrong, it's not gone, but
Correct.
I feel more empowered to approach it when it does come.
You carry it differently.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Beautifully
know,
said.
you
Yeah.
carry it differently. It's still there. It's like, instead of like lugging a heavy bag behind you, right now you put it in front of you and you're pushing it. Still there. It's just the way you're carrying it is way less draining, and you can take all those resources and put it towards something that you actually value, right?
Yeah.
Rather than truly wasting it in your head, considering every option under the sun. How am I going to handle this? What are they going to think? And instead you're putting it out here, and then
Mm.
then you're freer to do what you want. It's like what you said in the very beginning, that we think that by controlling it we're more in control, but we're not. We're more out of control, and we lose
Mm.
ourselves. So one of the things that I hear all the time, right, is this idea from people that, well, it's your parents, and this idea of you have to forgive them, and that, they did the best they could. They loved you as they knew how. And here's what I say to that, and I'm curious to get your take on this too, with your work that you do. So first off, I always say children don't choose their parents. We can't choose our parents, right? We can choose everybody else in our lives, but we can't choose our parents. That's what we're given, right? So I tell people who had really toxic upbringings, these are the cards you were dealt. It is 100% unfair. This was not the childhood you deserved, but this is what you got. You can't change it, but we can change how you respond to it. I also tell people, and I say this for any type of relationship, I don't believe clinically that forgiveness is necessary to move forward. What I do think is acceptance is necessary. Accepting the situation, you don't have to like it, but you do have to accept that it happened and you have to sit with it and you learn how to process it. Is it fair? Absolutely not. But I don't think forgiveness of the other person is necessary because that puts it on the other person. And I feel like it takes the control away from you. But I do think you need to accept what happened. I also don't believe that because this is, quote, your parent, that therefore you are responsible or you have an obligation to maintain a relationship with them if they're abusive or if they're neglectful or if they refuse to take accountability. So those are my takes. I'm curious your takes when you work with people on that.
So there's a few key things that I would say, right? With firstly, I'm actually strongly against pushing forgiveness on victims of abuse.
Mhm.
I'm not against forgiveness. I'm against pushing it
Yes.
on victims of
Yes.
abuse.
Very
Yeah.
well said.
So
So
so so
great.
so you can forgive, and if forgiveness comes and that helps you, then that's great.
Yep.
I think it can be very dangerous, by the way, if there is somebody out there still trying to claw you back in, to pull you back into a scenario so that they can continue to use you as a supply and continue to essentially abuse you. Forgiveness could pull down some of the very appropriate, decent barriers that you've put in place. So pushing this forgiveness can go through that. I too believe that you do need acceptance. You need to find a way to be able to draw a line and move on. You need to see your experience in its entirety. You need to see your parents or parent in their entirety for exactly as what they are, and then make a decision to do what's right for you to move forward in your life. I believe that's vital. I believe that one of the problems that we've got is more so than ever in a social media world is we're all looking to portray nowadays that we've done the work, right? We're all trying to look like we've moved through it and we've healed. Everybody talks about healing and doing the work, and it's become very sort of competitive and Western, and I need to show. And so I often hear people, they're talking about moving on, which if they've done that, that's great. But they frame it as forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say forgiveness isn't about you. It isn't about the abuser. It's about you moving on and deciding to cut yourself free from what they did. And I say, okay, that's great, but it's not forgiveness.
It's acceptance.
That's acceptance.
Yes.
Forgiveness requires me to give a level of grace
Yes.
to my abuser. Forgiveness says, not only am I accepting what you did, I'm giving you the grace to go forth in your life. And I believe if the person that has abused you all your life, the one person in your life that should have had the sole duty of loving you unconditionally and keeping you safe, if they've abused you your whole entire life, you do not have to afford them any grace to go on and live a great life. And so I feel when people push it, because that's what I find when I talk about the fact that you don't have to, I get people that can't leave it. They're like, no, you have to.
Yes.
And then, so then I straight away go, it's great if you found forgiveness.
Yeah.
But your need to push it on me and everybody else is not driven in an altruistic manner.
No.
It's driven because I don't think you truly forgive yourself, right?
And they're uncomfortable.
And you're uncomfortable with my ability to speak of true acceptance. And so, yeah, it's something that I'm very, very passionate about because it's quite a hot topic, and there's often kickback when I say you don't need to forgive because people think that well you're always going to be resentful, and it's like no. Acceptance will mean that I won't be, but I don't have to forgive. Yeah,
I think that's so perfectly said and so validating for people who are struggling with this, because I think this issue of forgiveness is something that pushing forgiveness on people. I love how you said that, because there is a difference between, if you find forgiveness, great. If it helps you, great, but nothing that should be pushed upon you. I think that it keeps people stuck. I actually think forcing forgiveness keeps people stuck, because it's still, if you think about it, it's still, that's so triggering for people who have been through trauma. You already have somebody who told you how to feel your entire life, or told you your feelings were wrong, or told you they were bad. And here you are again being told to get well, get healthy, forgive. You're still being told how to feel, and that you're deficient if you're not. And so it still keeps you locked in this cycle of, not only can I not have my own feelings, but I shouldn't even trust the ones that I do have.
Yeah. Here's how you should feel.
Yeah.
It just becomes bypassing, right? Because
Yes.
I would also argue that forgiveness is not an act. Forgiveness is not a task anyway. It's a byproduct of
Yeah.
other stuff that you do. And so, like, you might have a moment, you might do some stuff, you might be looking at some things over here, and you have this sudden moment where you go, you know what? I am in a space now in my life. Maybe your parents passed away. I think that would probably be a component that would need to be there. And you go, you know what? I can now give them some grace. And I think, great. If that comes, great. But it will only ever be a byproduct. It won't be because you wrote down, I forgive you 50 times on a piece of paper.
Correct.
Right? That's what I believe. Yeah.
Correct. That doesn't work.
Yeah,
Really?
well, you'd be amazed how often those kind of things are pushed, right? As if they do.
It's yes. I'll just say yes to that, because then it leaves a lot of undoing for us to have to do with people that come to see us, because it's just ass backwards.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah.
So one question that I get a lot of, and I want to ask you this too. A lot of times when people have these toxic upbringings, right, and they don't realize that they went through it, they just know they don't like how they felt, and that, other people around them maybe just were lucky to have better relationships, or they just for some reason were emotionally well off, right, because they had these great relationships, and you didn't, right, and you never talked about it, so you don't know what was going on behind closed doors of people, so you couldn't relate to them, or rely on them or anything like that. But when an adult child has the, and not everybody does, but has the aha moment of, whoa, wait a minute, wait, that's not normal. That was not normal. And then the pieces start to fit together. You start to connect the dots. You start to make sense of this. And you're left with a really difficult truth. And that is that my parents was abusive to me.
Mm.
What do you say to people who kind of have that moment, because it's traumatic for people when they realize their entire life what they thought it wasn't. And we hear this with narcissistic relationships as well, with intimate partners, that in the they feel like their world has been turned upside down when they realize that the person they were with, that was never really truly them. Right, and the ground is just completely pulled out from under them. So when that happens, but in these dynamics, what do you tell people? What do you see when that happens?
I think the first and feels most obvious thing is that you need to be held by someone or some people in this moment, right? And that's why this work that we're talking about is so important, because often people wake up to that realization and then have to fight it entirely alone, because any conversations that they have actually are just re-traumatizing them, because they're just having their realization denied and unvalidated. So finding people to hold you in that, I think, is of the highest importance. And then secondly, what I would say is that it's important to know that when you discover a new truth, you don't necessarily have to completely abolish in a second and in a heartbeat the other truth. Now, it may be that house is going to come all the way down, right? And I would argue it probably will. But you don't have to take a sledgehammer to your old truth so that you don't have a house. You can allow yourself to have some very paradoxical feelings, opposing truths. You can gently pull the old house down while you discover the new one, right? Because look, I do think that the realization in some ways will bulldoze a lot of that old house as well. That's why you need that holding. But you can be gentle, and know that if the house does get bulldozed down, it wasn't you that did this, right? I think that's really important. You were never lying. You were lied to, and I think that's really important as well, because I think the first thing you think is, I'm a fraud, because none of this is real and I've made it all up, right? And so I don't know how much I've rambled the thing
no,
there.
That's, I'm not saying a word. This is so good. I mean, the way you explained that is so important, because people are so scared to do the necessary work, because they're scared they're going to fall apart and never be able to put themselves back together if they start talking about it. Right. Yeah. It's like, if you're going to cry and you're trying so hard, like, I don't want to cry, because if I cry, I'm not going to be able to stop. Right. But imagine that times a million, that if you start talking about this, you're going to fall apart and never put yourself back together. And so and this is so important with trauma work. You never start in with somebody's trauma without them having emotion regulation strategies, physiological regulation strategies, because they're going to need it. Yeah. And that goes exactly to what you're saying. It was so beautifully said, that analogy of part of your house is going to get demolished, but you still need some of it to make that transition. Where are you going to live? Yeah. So I absolutely love that. And you're 100% correct. I mean, it's a great way to explain it. It's so true.
Yeah. And like I always, the crux of that is understanding that when you realize you've been the victim of abuse, you are the victim, right? And people get caught up in this. A lot of people will tell me that I keep people stuck in victimhood, right? Because I'm willing to talk so deeply about the problem. And I always say, like, I understand that some of the parents that we're talking about, they'll use victimhood, right? To play the martyr, yes. Right? So I understand what that is. But when you are actually the victim, allow yourself to be the victim for a moment, because that's how you will move through that. Is you will give yourself a break, stop thinking that you have to act in with complete honor and completely perfectly when you've just discovered that you've been abused for your whole life. Like, you wouldn't berate somebody who's drowning for acting a little crazy and shaking their arms about at the beginning. You wouldn't be like, stop acting silly. You'd be like, you're drowning. Let's get you support. And then when we get you to safety, then we'll start to work on calming you down a little bit. But for the moment, how you're acting's cool. Give yourself a break. Don't worry about what you look like, And
you know what? If the drowning person acted not, quote, crazy, who's going to notice they're drowning?
They'll drown.
They'll drown. No one's going to notice. If you're just hanging out drowning, no one's going to notice, and no one's going to know to help you.
Yeah, so you're so right. It's so good. Yeah.
Because you have a lot of people who have been through abuse and neglect, and, to ask for help is so difficult for them, because it probably was ignored, or it was, they were made to feel incompetent, or they were told they weren't allowed to have needs, right? That everybody, you take care of everybody else's needs. Your needs don't matter. And so if they're drowning, they're going to go with that narrative. You're not going to know. And it just reinforces to them that nobody cares. Nobody's going to help me, and then what I also see is, once they realize that that's their pattern, that it's hard for them to ask for help, or, they purposely don't ask for help and then wonder why they're not getting it. Then they have resentment.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody's helping me. And so these patterns that, again, worked in childhood, probably, someone like this, let's say, they kept their head down, kept their needs to themselves. That was like the safest, easiest route. But in adulthood, it doesn't work like that. And so that resentment builds, but it prevents you from moving forward, kind of like what you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Just stuck. Talk a little bit about your book. I want to hear all about your book, and I want my listeners to get your book.
So do I.
Yes. So yeah, talk a little bit about your book and what your purpose of the book is and what you hope people will get from it.
So the purpose of the book really is, the hook on the book is how to break free from toxic parents and reclaim your story. And I guess it's important for me to say that doesn't necessarily mean physically, right? It's not a book about how to go no contact. You don't have to be somebody that is or wants to go no contact. When we say break free, it's about how do you fully step into who you always were? How do you come home to yourself before you began abandoning in order to be able to survive in that environment? And so the first sort of 3 or 4 chapters, I spend a bit of time talking about the importance of community, of finding people in your life now, to find some people to be shoulder to shoulder with, the importance of what I call a body first approach, which is start to trust your body again. Because if you grew up in this environment, one of the first things you did was stop trusting your body, because every time you communicated what you felt in it, you were probably gaslit. So we do a bit of that, and there's like a bit of like managing and understanding what I mean when I say a toxic parent and when we mean dysfunction. And then the rest of the book is about a journey home to yourself. So the rest of the book really is like, how do I reclaim my power? And we use the notion of sort of reconnecting with, I call it your inner child, but I'd say to people, you're free to call it whatever you want. I just mean that part of you that you kind of lost as a result of what you experienced. And so it's a sort of workbook in that way. There's lots of journaling and different kind of exercises. And then, as I mentioned previously, the QR code at the end of each chapter means that once you do the kind of rational side of the work, you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to a video. And then I'll take you through a sort of somatic breathing practice as well, so that you're doing both elements throughout the book. And then by the end of it, I would hope that you understand who you are in the world today a little bit better, and you feel more integrated with all of the versions of yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about your approach too is that you don't give people this end point that they have to get to. You really kind of look at it as an ongoing process, and it's more of a journey rather than you have to get here. And I think that makes it easier for people to begin to know that there's no end. I think sometimes when people think there's an end point, then they have this idea that then now there's a possibility they can fail, and then they won't even start.
Yeah.
So I like that it's more of kind of this self-exploration, this journey, figuring out who you are, who you want to be if you don't know who you are, and just kind of recreating that. And there's no end to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And my core beliefs are about trying to be a human, trying to be real, trying to be who you really are. And if you're going to be that, you're going to be messy. There won't be an end point. I sometimes worry that we sell a bit of a sort of individualistic dream that if you work hard enough on yourself, you'll have everything together. And that's not been my experience. And actually, the moments in my life where I've truly felt that I've had it all together, when I look back at those moments retrospectively, that was when I was struggling the most and incapable of being able to look at that. So when I'm like, yeah, I'm messy. I'm messy. I have days when I just think I don't know how I'm going to get through my life feeling like this. And then I have days when I feel great. And, all of that is part of being a probably slightly above average sensitive person and living my life in the way that it is. And I want, I always sort of semi joke that if somebody says to me, I hope that I can get to the stage that you're at. If people say that to me, I feel like I've failed, because I'm like, don't make me the benchmark.
Yeah.
I'm just like you, right?
Yeah.
I'm probably just quite good at talking about my experience, but I'm not having a more together experience than you in this world. But I do feel like I have maybe some tools to navigate it a little bit better. Maybe, depending on when you ask me.
It's so interesting that people look at other people and assume they have it all together. I mean, yesterday I had a doctor's appointment. I had my sweatpants on backwards. I had 2 different pairs of socks. I was an absolute disaster. And person's looking, the woman's looking at me and she's like, you always seem to have it together. Really? Really? It's life, and it's messy, and it's far from perfect. And I think we've been sold this lie for so long in our society that the goal is to be happy. The goal is to be good and perfect and happy. And yeah, you can be happy, but I could be happy and then back out of my driveway and hit my mailbox, and now I'm not happy. So does that mean my day failed? And so I always tell people, a mood should never be a moving target, or a mood should never be a goal, because it's a moving target.
Yeah.
And if you want to live I think instead of saying happy life, a fulfilled life. And fulfilled means every single emotion under the sun and knowing how to manage them when they come up.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, if I look at my own children and you ask me, what do I want them to be? And the answer is, I want my daughters to be my daughters. I want them to be who they are. When they were born, I didn't look at them and think, oh, I hope you do really well so that you can be valuable, or I hope you work really hard so I can love you. I loved them instantly. They were of value instantly. So the love and the value was inherent.
Yeah.
And my job as a parent, the best I can, and I don't do this very well either, but the best I can is to help them grow up in every single one of their emotions, knowing that they are loved and still valued. And so that they get to be themselves. So what do I want to be? I want to be myself as much as I can, whatever that looks like. And, maybe that's less Instagrammable, right? And maybe that's, less all of that kind of social media age stuff that we live in, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And, the absence of truth is what kept me alone in my darkest moments,
Yep.
And I guess if you look at any old spiritual text, right, most spiritual teachers throughout history will tell you the truth will set you free. And I think that's what they meant.
Yeah. It's so heavy to carry anything else.
Exactly.
It really is. It's scary don't get me wrong, it's scary for that truth to come out. I think we can all relate to that, but it also will weigh you down.
Yeah.
And it just gets progressively worse unless you start to let it go. And again, for people listening, this isn't something that you wake up the next morning and you say, oh, I'm good. No. And even when you've quote healed, you're not done. It's still a process, but that is life. It's constantly moving through that process. There is no final point where you can say, yes, I could. You could say, I've worked through my stuff. I get why I do what I do. So now I'm more aware of when I'm triggered. To me, that's healing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's kind of what you said in the beginning. So final words, if you want somebody to take one thing from this today, what would kind of be your final words?
My final words would be that if you've grown up in any kind of dysfunction, then I would argue that so many of the ways that you feel probably make complete sense if you're able to see your experience in its entirety. If you're now an adult listening to this that grew up with a toxic parent, just to remind you that you have lots more power at your disposal in your life today. You have your voice, you have your intellect, you have your strength. You're not a defenseless child anymore. And you get to be whoever you want to be in this world if you just look at yourself and give yourself what you need, not what your parents needed. Give yourself what you need. And life can be all right. I come from some of the darkest experiences that one could imagine. And my life is all right most of the time, and most of the time I feel equipped to deal with everything that is thrown at me in my life. The hard times, the good times, the bad times, I mostly feel equipped, and it's a pretty special place to be, as bland as it might sound.
It's not bland. I think it's extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful because it doesn't, there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no, kind of like irrational pressure put on you, or there's this unrealistic, that's the word I'm looking for. It's so realistic, and and it's empowering, and the control is completely on you.
Yeah.
Nobody else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No, like you said, no matter what my life throws at me, I'm equipped. That doesn't mean you're not going to have days where you're like, I can't feel like this every day. I can't do this, right? Of course, we all do, but you're equipped to deal with it. And I think that is so unbelievably important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
That being equipped. And lastly, last little point is that to everybody listening is that I believe you. I believe you and I trust what you're feeling, even if it changes. And even if you figure out that what you're feeling right now was based on something different, I trust that what you feel is what you feel right now. And there's too much trying to tell people what and where they should be when it comes to how they feel. And we need more of like, feel how you feel right now. And it's okay if that changes, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Trust your body. Yeah.
Where can people find your book? It's Them Not You. Where can people find you and all your wonderful things?
My website's probably the best place to go for the book. It's just joshconnolly.co.uk. And yeah, you'll find links to the book there. And I'm Josh_FFW on social media, and I'm very busy on there. So I'm pretty easy to find nowadays. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I've been so excited to have this with you, and really just thankful that you were able to come on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.